Europe is a dream destination for many people. France, Italy, Germany, Spain, the United Kingdom. These are countries that enchant visitors with their luxury, history, and safety. They are destinations that welcome millions of tourists every year and reinforce the classic image of a rich, clean, civilized Europe. But there is one country on that map that does not fit this pattern. A place where prejudice comes before your passport, where the name alone causes suspicion. We are talking about Romania, one of the most rejected countries on the continent. Rejected by its neighbors, by the headlines, by the statistics, synonymous with corruption, poverty, danger. For many people, Romania is the kind of place you avoid. You hear about it, but you never consider visiting. But is all this true? How did an entire nation become synonymous with problems? And why does this country bother people so much? Today on Bello Mundo, we're going to dive into the most maligned country in Europe and discover what no one has told you about it. Number 1. Location and general information. If you don't know where Romania is on the map, don't worry. Many people don't. Romania is in Eastern Europe. It borders Ukraine, Hungary, Bulgaria, Serbia, and Moldova. And to the south, it has a strip of coastline bathed by the Black Sea. Geographically, it is at a crossroads. It lies between Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, and so-called Central Europe. But it doesn't really fit into any of these regions. It's as if it's always in the middle. The territory is not huge. It is about the size of the state of Oregon. But within this area, there is a variety of landscapes that is difficult to imagine. In the center of the country, for example, lies the Carpathian Mountains, a chain of mountains with dense forests, bears, wolves, and villages that seem frozen in time. This is where Mount Moldoveanu, the highest point in Romania, stands at over 8,000 feet above sea level. Further south, the mountains give way to fertile plains. This is where the larger cities, agricultural fields, and much of the population that lives off the land are located. Continuing to the far east, you reach the Danube Delta, one of the largest in Europe, a region full of canals, rare birds, and biodiversity that looks like something out of a documentary. And then there's the coast. The Romanian coast on the Black Sea is home to cities such as Constanța, which combines beaches, Roman ruins, and nightlife. It's not a famous tourist destination, but that's precisely why it still retains a charm that is both raw and secret. In the middle of it all is Bucharest, the capital, a city full of contrasts, with Soviet architecture, 19th century palaces, modern cafes, wide avenues, and heavy traffic. In fact, it's not just Bucharest. Driving in Romania is not easy. Not to say that it's complete chaos. In cities, traffic is confusing and intense. Parking is also complicated. Romanians are not used to lining up their cars properly, and if there are no parking spaces, it is common to find vehicles on the sidewalks or double parked. On the roads, it is not much different. There is a lack of adequate signage, almost no speed limit signs, and reckless passing increases the number of accidents. So, you can never be too careful. In addition to geography, another intriguing aspect is the country's history. Number 2. History. Romania did not emerge as a power or a dominant empire. In fact, it spent much of its history as a battleground between giants. The Romans arrived first, leaving behind roads, fortresses, and even their name. Then came the Ottomans, the Austro-Hungarians, and the Russians, all wanting a piece of the territory. This geographical position became both a curse and an identity. Always surrounded, always watched, always absorbing a little of each invader, but never completely surrendering. At that time, Romania did not even exist as a single country. There were 3 separate regions: Transylvania, Moldavia, and Wallachia. Each had its own conflicts, alliances, and occupations. Unification only began in the 19th century after much war, external pressure, and international treaties. Even so, the idea of a nation was slow to take hold. Soon after came the world wars, the bombings, the Soviet occupation, and the forced transformation into a communist republic. Under Nicolae Ceausescu's regime, the country became a closed dictatorship, isolated from the world and marked by fear, censorship, poverty, surveillance. No one could leave, no one could speak, no one could choose. And as if that weren't enough, there were the dictator's absurd policies. One of the most bizarre was the plan to strengthen the nation by forcing couples to have at least 5 children. Even with shortages, empty shelves, and precarious hospitals, the government encouraged population growth as if it were a patriotic mission. The regime fell in the late 1980s, but the trauma remained. The decades of isolation left marks that are difficult to erase. Even today, there are people who associate Romania with that gray image of Eastern Europe, made of concrete blocks and scarcity. And perhaps it is precisely because it resisted so long between empires, dictatorships, and invasions that the country has become what it is today. Number 3. Population, religion, and beliefs. After so much invasion, division, and dictatorship, you might expect a rigid, standardized people, somewhat lacking in identity. But it's just the opposite. Romania is made up of human contrasts. There are more than 19 million people living in very different realities. On the one hand, there are large cities such as Cluj-Napoca, Iași, and Bucharest, with universities, heavy traffic, and a modern lifestyle. On the other hand, there are villages where life still follows a different rhythm. Wagons on dirt roads, clothes hanging on clotheslines, wood-burning stoves smoking in the late afternoon. Places where neighbors call each other by name and everyone has known each other for generations. Most are Romanian, but there are communities that maintain strong traditions, such as the Hungarians in Transylvania and the Roma, whom we will talk more about later. And when it comes to faith, Romania is not a lukewarm country. More than 80% of the population follows Orthodox Christianity, and this is everywhere. Stone churches, candles lit in silence, religious icons on the walls, blessings before meals. Religion appears in celebrations, customs, and superstitions. Even among younger people who say they are not that religious, many still follow habits that came from their faith. Some people don't wash their hair on certain Fridays, some only schedule weddings when the Orthodox calendar allows, and some don't leave home without making the sign of the cross, sometimes out of belief, sometimes out of tradition. But it's still there, shaping everyday life. And beyond their diversity, Romanians are famous for something no one expects: extreme hospitality. Number 4. Hospitality. One of the biggest surprises for visitors to Romania is the people. More specifically, the way they welcome you. You know that expression, "My home is your home"? There, they take it literally. In rural villages, it is common to find houses with unlocked doors, and not because of a lack of security, but out of genuine hospitality. It's as if they're saying, whoever arrives is invited. If you show up unannounced, no problem. You'll find a table being set, food warming on the stove, and your host making a point of serving you whatever they have. Even if they haven't planned anything, they'll act as if everything has been ready for ages. This custom comes from way back. In the difficult times of communism, sharing what little you had was a matter of survival. And that community spirit has remained. Today, it manifests itself as generosity, as a pleasure in showing off the best the country has to offer. Oh, and it's worth remembering, in Romanian culture, sending a visitor away is considered rude. So if you make friends there, be prepared. A coffee can last an entire afternoon. Lunch turns into dinner. And since we're talking about the table, there's nothing better than talking about food. Number 5. Gastronomy. One of the most popular dishes is sarmal, cabbage rolls stuffed with ground beef, rice, and spices, slowly cooked in a thick tomato sauce. It's a family meal, the kind that reminds you of Sundays. Another classic is mamaliga, a kind of firm polenta, usually served with salted cheese, sour cream, and eggs. It may seem simple, but in Romania it is pure comfort, especially on cold days. And of course, there is ciorba, a sour soup made with vegetables, meat, bone broth, and a touch of vinegar or lemon. There are versions with chicken, pork, tripe, and fish. Each region has its own, and every family swears that their grandmother's is unbeatable. Pork is also a guaranteed presence. In some inland regions, the tradition of gathering the family to prepare sausages, smoked meats, and preserves during the winter is still alive. It is a ritual of endurance and memory. And to accompany all this, there is always bread. Because in Romania, bread is more than just an accompaniment. It is the most important food on the table. It is present at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Even if nothing else is available, there is always bread. The reason is simple. It is cheap, accessible, and symbolizes abundance. Along with bread, another almost sacred element of the Romanian table is tuica, a strong and aromatic artisanal plum brandy. It is served in small doses before meals. It is a symbol of hospitality. If you are invited to dinner at someone's house, you can be sure that tuica will come first, as a kind of welcome ritual. Number 6. Traditions. If there's one thing that's not lacking in Romania, besides abundant food, it's curious traditions, starting with marriage. In many families, there is an unwritten rule that says there can only be one wedding per year. That's right. If 2 siblings are engaged, the younger one has to wait. They say that 2 weddings in the same year is bad luck. As a result, some couples postpone everything just to keep the custom alive. It's almost like getting in an invisible queue. Whoever started dating first gets married first. Another very Romanian tradition is bride kidnapping. During the wedding party, the bride's friends simply disappear with her. They take her to a nearby bar or hidden square, while the groom is left wondering what to do. After a while, he receives a message from the kidnappers with a ransom demand. It could be a bottle of alcohol, a public declaration of love, or a funny dance. Only after he pays the ransom or buys the champagne does the bride return, to applause and laughter. And since we're talking about marriage, there's another detail that stands out there. You know that saying, "Those who marry want a house"? Number 7. Housing, the country where almost everyone owns their own home. Today, about 96% of Romanians live in a house or apartment that belongs to their own family. It is one of the highest rates of home ownership in the world, higher than Switzerland, Germany, and France, and much higher than the European average. And if you're wondering how a country with a history of struggle, dictatorship, and economic crisis achieved this feat, the answer lies in Romania's recent history. After the fall of communism in the early 90s, the government decided to sell the apartments that previously belonged to the state. About 70% of urban housing was public, and suddenly it was put up for sale at symbolic prices. Many people bought the apartment where they lived for a price comparable to that of a color TV at the time. This created an entire generation of homeowners, families who, even with few resources, had a place to live without paying rent. To this day, this model influences the country's lifestyle, Renting is rare, and even the youngest end up inheriting property or buying modest homes with the help of their families. It is a type of security that is lacking in many places, and in Romania it has become part of the way of life. Number 8. Curious places. Even if you've never considered visiting Romania, there's one place you've definitely heard of: Transylvania. And of course, Dracula's castle. They're not just things from books or movies, they really exist. The castle is actually called Bran Castle. It sits atop a hill surrounded by dense forests and a mist that looks like something out of a Gothic tale. And although it wasn't exactly home to the world's most famous vampire, it does have a connection to the figure who inspired the character, the dreaded Vlad Tepes, the Impaler. Vlad was a prince of Wallachia known for his brutality. He ruled with an iron fist, cruel punishments, and a certain pleasure in spreading fear. His fame spanned centuries until it became legend. And it was from this legend that the writer Bram Stoker created the character Count Dracula in the 19th century. The rest became tourism. Today, the castle attracts thousands of visitors every year. Everyone wants to see up close the fortress that fuels the imagination about vampires and Romania's dark reputation. But the country is much more than that. Romania has 7 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Among them are the Dacian fortresses in the Orăștie Mountains, wooden churches in Maramureș, painted monasteries, villages with fortified churches, the historic center of Sighișoara, and the Danube Delta, one of the largest and best-preserved wetlands in Europe. And there is still room for the unusual, like the cemetery in Sapansa, also known as the Mary Cemetery. There, each gravestone is painted with vibrant colors, caricatures, and poems that humorously recount how the person lived and died. Instead of sadness, what you see there is a celebration of life, memory, and even death, with a light-hearted touch. It is this kind of contrast that makes Romania such a surprising country, full of landscapes, stories, and traditions that escape the cliché. But despite all this, there are still people who turn up their noses just hearing the name, and then comes the inevitable question: why is a country with so much history, incredible landscapes, and hospitable people still so maligned? The answer lies in a combination of stereotypes, generalizations, and pure and simple prejudice. Number 9. Prejudice and stereotypes. Much of Romania's negative reputation stems from an old and dangerous confusion between the Romanian people and the Roma ethnic group, also known as Gypsies. The Roma are a nomadic group, originally from India, spread across several European countries. Romania does, in fact, have one of the largest Roma populations on the continent, but that doesn't mean that all Romanians are Roma, much less that all Roma represent the country. Still, it was precisely this mix of concepts that fueled one of the most unfair stigmas in Europe. Historically, the Roma have been subjected to slavery, persecution, and even extermination during Nazism. Even today, they live on the margins of society in several countries. When Romania joined the European Union in 2007, many Roma took advantage of freedom of movement and migrated to countries such as France, the United Kingdom, and Italy. However, the culture shock was intense. In several cities, makeshift camps sprang up, people begged for money on the streets, and yes, there were some cases of theft. The exception became the rule. All Roma people came to be seen as con artists, thieves, or freeloaders. If you've watched the series Peaky Blinders, you'll remember the stigma. In the plot, the Shelby family has Roma roots. That alone is enough to make them the target of prejudice, persecution, and mistrust. Of course, that's fiction, and they were criminals. But that doesn't mean that the entire community was. In fact, we have a video here on our channel that tells the story of the Roma, the persecution they have suffered over the centuries, and the terror they have faced. The fact is that prejudice spread like wildfire, affecting even those who had nothing to do with the story, such as the Romanian population. Romania became a scapegoat, as if it were the cradle of everything Europe wanted to reject. To give you an idea of the level of prejudice, in 2013, the then Prime Minister of France, Manuel Valls, publicly declared that the Roma had a way of life incompatible with French society, and that most of them should be deported. As if they were all from Romania, as if there were no French, Italian, or Spanish Roma, as if ethnicity were a stamp of a country. At the time, less than 4% of Romania's population was of Roma ethnicity. Even so, the entire country came to bear this stigma, and along with it came other labels: a poor, backward country, full of people wanting to steal jobs and live off the system. Many Romanians also emigrated in search of better living conditions, ordinary people, like any other immigrants. But Europe, which loves to build invisible walls, began to view everyone with the same suspicion. British newspapers spoke of an invasion from the east. Headlines warned of Romanian gangs, social collapse, and Romanians looting public coffers. And even without evidence, the image was built up day after day. And as if all that weren't enough, there was the horse meat scandal. In 2013, the horse meat scandal exploded. European supermarkets were selling beef adulterated with horse meat, and they quickly pointed the finger at Romania. But the truth is that the country exports this type of meat legally, with correct labeling, as is common in many parts of Europe. The fraud happened later, in another country, where someone switched the labels. Even so, the blame fell on Romania. To this day, there are people who remember Romania as that place that sells horse meat in disguise. And as if all that weren't enough, there are still real problems. Rural poverty, functional illiteracy, poor roads. Much still needs to improve, yes, as in every country. But when all this is combined with old stigmas, prejudice gains strength. In the end, a country with history, culture, and people like any other ended up becoming synonymous with poverty, deception, and danger. But those who take the time to look beyond the headlines almost always find a place very different from the one that was painted. But now I want to hear from you. Was your view of Romania similar to the one we showed you? Or have you also fallen for the sensationalist headlines and cheap stereotypes that circulate out there? Leave a comment telling us what surprised you the most. And if you haven't subscribed yet, take the opportunity to subscribe here at Bello Mundo. Activate notifications and like the video. Here we continue to travel through a world that most people prefer to ignore. See you next time.